Diane Prescott grabbed the tired man by the collar of his gray hoodie and yanked him half out of his own first-class seat. "Get him off this plane, now!" The whole cabin turned. 40 faces. 40 pairs of eyes locking onto the man she had by the shirt. The man in the cheap sweatshirt. The man with 2 days of stubble and a frayed backpack. The man who did not fight back, did not even flinch. Just looked up at her with a calm that made her hand tighten harder. His name was Ethan Carter. He was 35 years old. He was a single father, and in the backpack under his seat sat the master authorization for a $52 billion deal that none of these people, not Diane, not the 2 officers already walking down the jet bridge, not the angry man in 3C who'd started all of it, had the first idea existed. Before we go on, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from, because I want to see how far this story travels. And if you believe a man should be heard before he's judged, subscribe right now. Because in about 9 minutes, this woman is going to make the worst mistake of her life, and I don't want you to miss the moment she realizes it. 60 seconds earlier, none of this had been happening. 60 seconds earlier, Ethan Carter was asleep. He'd boarded first before the crowd because he could barely stand. 48 hours. That was how long he'd been awake 2 days finishing the last piece of a system that 4 governments and 11 airlines had been waiting 3 years for. He'd showered in a lounge. He'd eaten a granola bar for dinner. And the second he'd dropped into seat 2A and slid the old canvas backpack under the seat in front of him, his eyes had closed and the world had gone dark and warm and quiet. He'd earned that seat, paid full fare cash, no discount, no miles. Not that anybody looked at him and believed it. The woman across the aisle had leaned to her husband and whispered behind her hand. The businessman beside Ethan had angled his shoulder away like the hoodie might be catching. The gate agent had checked his boarding pass twice and said, "First class, sir." With that little lift at the end. That question that wasn't a question. Ethan had heard all of it. He always heard it. He just didn't care anymore. His father had fixed diesel engines for a living. His mother had cleaned offices at night. And the one thing they'd hammered into him before he was 10 years old was this: a man knows who he is. That's enough. You never have to prove it to somebody who already decided. So Ethan never proved it. He built things instead. He'd built the thing in his backpack. $52 billion of it. The kind of system that stitched airlines to airports, to cargo networks, to national transportation grids. He was the lead architect. His signature was the last one required. Nothing on that program launched until he said the word. Nobody on that plane knew that. That was the whole problem. It started 3 rows back with a man named Gregory Vance. Vance had complained about the temperature before the door was shut. He'd complained about the champagne, and 40 minutes into boarding, he discovered that the recline mechanism on his $11,000 seat was broken, and Gregory Vance decided this was the great injustice of the age. "This is unacceptable." His voice carried the length of the cabin. "I paid for a flat bed. I did not pay to sit up like an animal across the Atlantic." Diane came fast in the voice she saved for men like this. "Sir, I'm so sorry. Let me see what I can do." There was nothing to do. The flight was full. Every seat had a body in it. No working seat to move him to. No upgrade to offer nothing. And Gregory Vance did not want sorry. He wanted fixed. He wanted somebody to conjure a solution out of thin air, and when Diane couldn't, his eyes went cold. "Then move somebody," he said. "Find me a seat that works, I don't care how." And Diane Prescott. 22 years a flight attendant, senior crew. A woman who told the younger girls she could read a cabin like a palm turned around, and did the thing she always did when she got cornered. She went looking for the weakest person on the plane. Her eyes swept the aisle. Past the executives. Past the woman in silk. Past the man whose watch cost more than the fuel. And they landed on the man asleep against the window in 2A. The hoodie, the stubble, the frayed bag. Him something in her decided in the space of a single breath. He's the one who doesn't matter. He's the one I can move. She crossed to him and shook his shoulder, hard. Sir, wake up. I need your boarding pass. Ethan surfaced slowly, blinking. You scanned it at the door. I need to see it again. Something in her tone woke him the rest of the way. That flatness. That cold. He'd heard it his whole life, and he knew it like a song from the first note. He dug the folded pass out of his pocket and held it up. She barely glanced at it. There's been a seating mix-up, she said. I need you to gather your things and move to the back of the aircraft. We have a seat for you in economy. The cabin went quiet. Not real quiet, the fake kind. The kind where 40 people stop reading and start listening while pretending they aren't. Ethan sat up straight. There's no mix-up. This is 2A. I paid full fare for it. Sir, I have the confirmation on my phone. There's no mix-up and I'm not moving. And that was the part Diane hadn't planned for, because men like him folded. That was the rule. A firm voice, a hard hand, and they shrank right down and did what they were told because men like him had spent their whole lives being told what to do. That was how the world worked. But he wasn't folding. He was just sitting there, calm as still water, looking at her. And it made her furious in a way she couldn't have explained if you'd paid her. Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time, and I'm telling you one more time, Ethan said, still quiet, still steady. I'm not giving up a seat I paid for because a man 3 rows back doesn't like his recliner. If there's a problem, it's yours, not mine. That was when the older man spoke up, 6 rows back, silver hair, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, a paperback splayed on his knee. He had the unbothered voice of a man who'd spent a career being listened to. Ma'am, forgive me. He didn't raise his voice at all. That gentleman is right. I watched him board. That's his seat. There's no cause to move him. Diane didn't turn her head. This doesn't concern you, sir. It concerns everyone, the old man said, when a paying passenger gets pulled out of his seat because another one threw a tantrum. I spent 30 years on the federal bench, ma'am. I know exactly what it looks like when somebody picks the wrong man to take the fall. 30 years on the bench. A judge. Ethan filed it away and said nothing. But Diane had already crossed the line inside her own head, the line where backing down meant admitting she was wrong. And Diane Prescott did not admit she was wrong. Not in 22 years, not to a man in a hoodie, not in front of a full cabin. I'm calling this in, she snapped, and she spun on her heel and marched to the galley and snatched up the interphone. Ethan watched her go, and for one long second he almost walked. Not to economy. Off the whole plane. Grab the bag, take the next flight, and leave these people to their little kingdom of leather seats and warm champagne. He had the power to do exactly that. He had the power to do a great deal more than that. And the tired part of him, the part that hadn't slept in 2 days, just wanted to be done. Then he thought of Lily, 7 years old, waiting at his sister's house right now with her stuffed rabbit and her gap-toothed grin. Last week she'd come home from school with wet eyes because a boy told her that her clothes came from the wrong store. And Ethan had pulled her onto his knee and wiped her face and told her the truest thing he knew. Baby, the day you let somebody else decide what you're worth is the day you hand them your whole life. Don't ever hand anybody your life. You stand where you have a right to stand. You hear me. He'd said that to her 3 days ago. And now here he was. If he stood up and slunk to the back of the plane, then every word he'd told that little girl was a lie. So he stayed. He folded his hands in his lap, and he stayed. You all right, son? The judge asked quietly. I'm fine. Thank you. They'll make it ugly. You know that. I know. Name's Harold Whitfield, retired Southern District of New York. The old man's jaw set. You want a witness, you've got one. What they're doing right now is going to cost that woman her job. Ethan almost smiled. You have no idea, he thought. It's going to cost a whole lot more than that. Thank you, Your Honor, was all he said. She came back with 2 officers. Real airport police vests, radios, the flat-tired faces of men who got called to airplanes all day long to handle drunks and lost tempers, and the small ugliness of people crammed into small tubes. They came down the aisle. Diane pointed, and the cabin went silent again. "Sir," the first officer said, "we need you to step off the aircraft." "On what grounds?" The officer blinked. He hadn't expected a question. "Crew asked you to deplane. When the crew asks, you comply. Those are the rules. The crew asked me to give up a seat I legally bought," Ethan said, "so they could hand it to a man who's angry about a recliner. That's not a lawful order. That's a woman who doesn't want to admit she made a mistake." He kept his hands open on his knees, everything about him slow and visible. "I've raised my voice at no one. I've threatened no one. I'm sitting in my own seat and I'd like to fly home. That's all." The officer's jaw worked, because Ethan was right, and some part of the man knew he was right, and if this had been a courtroom, it would have ended right there. But it wasn't a courtroom. It was a plane. And on a plane, the crew's word was law, and the crew had made up its mind, and the officer's job did not include untangling who was right. "Sir, I'm not going to ask again. I'm going to ask." Officer Whitfield started to rise. "I'm a retired federal judge, and I'm telling you, you are about to make a serious—" "Sir, sit down. You are removing a lawful passenger on the word of a crew member who has given no legitimate—" "Sir, sit down, or you come off too." Harold Whitfield sat. Slowly. His face was tight with the particular fury of a man who'd spent his whole life inside the rules watching them get bent by the very people sworn to hold them. And then it happened. The first officer reached down and took Ethan's arm. "Up, let's go." Ethan rose, but on his own terms, slow hands out, where every eye could see them. And he lifted his voice for the first time, not in anger, but so the whole cabin and the dozen phones already up out of pockets could hear every word. "I am not resisting. Clear. Level. I want everyone to see this. I am not fighting. I am not raising my voice. I paid for this seat. I have done nothing wrong, and these two men are removing me by force. Stop talking and walk." "I'm walking." He was. Careful steps, no sudden move. "But I want it on the record. I want every camera in this cabin to see that I stood up peacefully, that I never lifted a hand, and that I am being dragged off this plane for exactly one reason." "And what reason is that?" the second officer said flatly, taking his other arm. Ethan stopped. He looked down the whole length of the cabin at Diane by the galley with her chin up and her arms crossed at Gregory Vance, already half out of 3C, reaching for the seat that wasn't his at 40 faces, some ashamed, some hungry for the show, most just grateful it wasn't them. "Because," Ethan said quiet again, "I didn't look like I belonged." For a second, nobody breathed. Then a woman in row 3 said it soft and clear. "He's right. That's exactly what happened. I saw all of it." A man near the bulkhead. "This is disgusting." And from the back, somebody narrating low into a phone. "First-class passenger dragged off for nothing. You're all watching this. This is happening right now. It didn't matter. The officers had him. They walked him up the aisle, one on each arm, past every one of those faces. And Ethan let them. Because there was nothing to win by fighting and everything to win by walking off that plane with his head up, his hands empty, and 40 cameras rolling. At the front, he glanced back once. "My bag. I need my bag." Diane grabbed it herself, the old canvas backpack, and held it out at arm's length, the way you'd hand somebody a bag of garbage. "Take your things." Ethan took it, slung it over his shoulder, felt the weight settle against his back, the $52 billion weight of it, though she would never know that, though none of them would know it for another 20 minutes. He looked her dead in the eye. "Thank you," he said, and he meant it. And that, the calm, the courtesy, the total absence of the rage she'd been counting on, that unsettled Diane Prescott, more than any screaming match could have. Because a man who shouts is a man you've beaten. A man who thanks you and walks off with his chin level is a man who knows something you don't. For half a second, A cold little worm turned over in her gut. Then she crushed it. He's nobody, she told herself. A man in a hoodie. What could he possibly do? She would remember thinking that. For the rest of her life, she would remember thinking exactly that. They marched him up the jet bridge and into the terminal and let go of his arms in the middle of the concourse, where the fluorescent lights washed everything the same tired gray as his sweatshirt. "You're free to go," the first officer said. "Rebook at customer service. Don't try to get back on that aircraft." Ethan rolled his shoulder where the grip had been. "For what it's worth, you were doing your job. I don't hold it against you. Either of you. You got put in a bad spot by somebody who should have known better." The officer looked at him, and something flickered across his face, the first small crack of unease. Because in 15 years of pulling people off airplanes, he'd never once had one thank him on the way out. He'd never had one this calm. Guilty men got loud. Innocent men got loud. This man got quiet, and quiet was starting to feel wrong. "Right," he said. "Take care of yourself." They walked away, and Ethan Carter stood alone in the middle of Terminal 4. That was when it finally came up, all of it at once. The exhaustion, the humiliation, the rage he hadn't let a single person see. His hands were shaking. He looked down and watched them shake and couldn't stop it. He thought of his daughter. "You stand where you have a right to stand." He thought of his father wiping grease from his knuckles with a red rag. You never have to prove it to anybody who already decided. And he thought about the thing on his shoulder, and the 41 signatures waiting on his one, and the $52 billion that could not move an inch in any direction on this planet until Ethan Carter said the word. He pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered over a name. Raymond Okafor, Chief Operations Director. A man who answered Ethan's calls at any hour of any day, because when Ethan Carter called, it was never small. And Ethan almost didn't press it. That was the truth of it. Standing there under those cold lights, part of him just wanted to go home. Hold his little girl. Let it go. Take the loss, keep his peace, and never think about Diane Prescott again. But then he thought about the next man. The next tired man in a cheap hoodie who'd board a plane next week or next month or next year. The one who wouldn't have a number in his phone that could stop the world. The one who'd get dragged up the aisle and dumped in the terminal and told to take care of himself, and who'd have no judge on his side, no 40 cameras, no $52 billion in a canvas bag. The one who'd trudge home and look his own kid in the eye and admit that, yeah, sometimes people decide what you're worth before you open your mouth, and there is not one thing you can do about it. Ethan Carter was not going to let that be true. Not while he had the power to make it a lie. He pressed the name. One ring. Ethan. Instantly awake, instantly alert. "What's wrong?" "You're supposed to be in the air." Ethan looked back down the concourse toward the gate, toward the bridge, toward the plane full of people who'd watched him hauled away, and decided he was nothing. "Raymond." His voice never rose above the calm his father had taught him. "Delay the launch. Suspend every partnership involving this airline. Effective now." Silence on the line. A long one. "Ethan." Slow. Careful. "Do you understand what you're asking me to do?" That's everything. Every contract, every route agreement, every implementation. That's 11 other carriers, 4 governments, the cargo networks, the underwriters. If I pull your authorization, it doesn't just stop them, it ripples out across the whole program. And it does not come back easy. It does not come back fast. Tell me you're sure." Ethan closed his eyes. He thought of a hand shaking his shoulder. "Sir, I need your boarding pass." He thought of a woman holding out his dead wife's backpack like it was trash. He thought of 40 faces deciding in a second and a half exactly who he was. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," he said. "Do it." 1,000 miles away, Raymond Okafor sat down slowly at his desk and opened a screen no more than 6 people on Earth had the clearance to see. His hand hovered over a command that was about to shut off the lights on the biggest aviation deal of the decade. "Okay," he whispered. Okay, it's done. Ethan, God help them. It is done. The line went quiet, and in Terminal 4 at JFK, a tired single father in a gray hoodie slid the phone back into his pocket, hitched a frayed backpack higher on his shoulder, and started walking toward the exit. Behind him, in glass towers in New York and London and Singapore and Dubai, phones were already beginning to light up in the dark. The first one to feel it was a man named Curtis Bell. Curtis was the airline's senior vice president of strategic partnerships, and at that exact moment, he was standing in a boardroom on the 41st floor of the airline's Manhattan headquarters in the middle of a champagne toast, celebrating the fact that in 6 days, his company would flip the switch on the single largest infrastructure integration in its 90-year history. His phone buzzed. He ignored it. It buzzed again, and again. And then it didn't stop, and across the room, 3 other phones started going off at once, and Curtis Bell looked down at the screen in his hand and felt the champagne turn to acid in his stomach. Program status suspended. All partnership authorizations involving carrier frozen pending. Lead architect review. That's a glitch, somebody said. That's got to be a system glitch. It was not a glitch, because 30 seconds later, the first partner called, then the second, then a number out of Singapore, then one out of Frankfurt, and every one of them was asking the same impossible question in the same rising voice. Why has your carrier been pulled off the program? What did you people do? Curtis Bell did not know what they'd done. Curtis Bell had no idea, standing there with a champagne flute in his hand, that 90 minutes ago, a flight attendant on one of his own aircraft had grabbed a man in a gray hoodie by the collar and thrown him off a plane. He was about to find out, because the lead architect, the one man on Earth whose single authorization held the entire $52 billion structure together, the one man every partner and every government was now frantically trying to reach, had just been dragged through Terminal 4 by 2 of Curtis Bell's own security officers. And he was not answering his phone. Back at the gate, the plane hadn't even pushed back yet. Gregory Vance was settling happily into seat 2. Ethan's seat still warm, congratulating himself on a problem well solved. Diane Prescott was pouring a fresh glass of champagne with steady hands, already rehearsing the version of events she'd write up later. The version where the man in the hoodie was aggressive, was a problem, left her no choice, and Judge Harold Whitfield sat 6 rows back with his paperback closed on his lap, watching the galley, thinking about the young man's face. That calm, that courtesy. Thank you, the boy had said to the woman who'd just destroyed his evening. Men didn't say thank you like that unless they knew something. Whitfield had put 4 decades into reading faces across a courtroom, and everything in 30 years of instinct was telling him he'd just watched the beginning of something, not the end of it. He didn't know what. He only knew that when it landed, it was going to land hard. Up in the galley, Diane's phone lit up in her apron pocket. She glanced at it. The lead purser's name. She let it ring. She was busy. She'd call back. It rang again immediately. Then a third time. Then the cockpit door opened, and the captain leaned out with a look on his face she had never once seen in 22 years of flying with him. A look somewhere between confusion and fear. And he said, "Diane, the man you removed from 2A, what was his name?" She frowned. I don't know, some passenger. Why? "Get me the manifest," the captain said. "Get it now. Corporate's calling the aircraft. They're calling the aircraft Diane. New York is asking who was sitting in that seat, and they're asking like the world's on fire." And for the second time that hour, that cold little worm turned over in Diane Prescott's stomach. Only this time, it didn't go away. The captain's voice cracked when he said it again. "The manifest, Diane. Right now." She pulled it up on the galley tablet with fingers that wouldn't quite hold steady, and she scrolled to seat 2A, and she read the name printed there, and she felt nothing at first. Because the name meant nothing to her. Carter Ethan. Just a name. Just a man in a hoodie. She almost laughed with relief. "It's nobody, Captain. Carter. Ethan Carter. I've never heard of him." The captain didn't laugh. The captain went very still. The way a man goes still when he's just heard a sound he can't explain in a house he thought was empty. Say that again. Ethan Carter. Why, who is he? And the captain said in a voice she would hear in her sleep for the rest of her career. Diane Corporate has been trying to reach an Ethan Carter for the last 20 minutes. Every partner on the program is trying to reach him. 4 governments are trying to reach him. And you threw him off my airplane. The champagne flute in Gregory Vance's hand 3 feet away in seat 2 suddenly seemed like the most obscene object in the world. Diane's mouth had gone dry. That has to be a different Carter. That man was wearing a hoodie. He had a backpack that was falling apart. He was... She stopped. She heard herself. She heard exactly what she was saying, which was he didn't look important, which was the whole reason she'd picked him in the first place, and the floor of her stomach dropped out from under her all at once. Get off the aircraft, the captain said. Go find him. Go find him now, before he leaves the airport, and you pray to God he hasn't already made a phone call. He had already made the phone call. 90 seconds ago, in fact, and 1,000 miles away, that phone call was tearing through the 41st floor of the airline's Manhattan headquarters like a fire through a dry field. Curtis Bell had stopped celebrating. Curtis Bell was standing in the center of the boardroom with his tie loosened and his face the color of paper, and around him the champagne had gone flat and forgotten, while 11 people shouted into 11 phones at once. Every screen in the room had turned red. Program status suspended. The words wouldn't change, no matter how many times anyone refreshed. Somebody had the head of IT on speaker, insisting it was a system error, and the head of IT was insisting right back, his voice climbing higher with every word that it was not an error, that the suspension had come through the lead architect's own authorization key, that no one had the clearance to reverse it except the man who'd issued it. Then get me the man who issued it, Curtis roared. We're trying, sir, a young analyst said, phone pressed white-knuckled to her ear. We've been trying for 20 minutes. He's not answering. His office says he was flying home tonight. He was supposed to be on the 8:15 out of JFK. The room went quiet. Curtis Bell felt something crawl up the back of his neck. The 8:15 out of JFK, he repeated slowly. That's one of ours. Yes, sir. Get me that flight. Get me that flight right now. And that was the moment, that precise moment, when the 2 threads of the evening, the man in Terminal 4 and the boardroom on the 41st floor, finally snapped together into one, and Curtis Bell understood with sick dawning horror that the $52 billion catastrophe unfolding on every screen in the room had begun somewhere on one of his own airplanes less than 2 hours ago, with a passenger nobody could account for. Meanwhile, Ethan was almost to the exit. He'd made it halfway across the terminal, the automatic doors, and the cold night, and the taxi line just ahead, and every step took him further from the worst hour of his adult life. He wanted a shower. He wanted his bed. He wanted more than either of those things to hear his daughter's voice, and he'd already pulled up his sister's number to call and say goodnight to Lily before it got too late. He never made the call, because behind him, echoing off the polished floor, a voice he'd hoped never to hear again was calling his name. Sir, Mr. Carter, please wait. He stopped. He didn't turn around right away. He stood there for a moment with his back to her, and he let himself feel the exhaustion of it, the sheer weight of what was coming. And then he turned. Diane Prescott was half running across the terminal toward him, and she was not the same woman who'd grabbed his collar 20 minutes ago. The chin was down now. The certainty was gone. Her face had come apart into something raw and frightened, and she was clutching the galley tablet against her chest like a shield. Mr. Carter, she said, breathless, skidding to a stop in front of him. Mr. Carter, there's been a terrible... I need to apologize. I need to... You found out who I am, Ethan said quietly. She flinched like he'd struck her. Somebody told you, he went on in that same level voice. Corporate called the plane. They're looking for me. And now, all of a sudden, I'm not a man in a hoodie anymore. Now, I'm Mr. Carter. Now you're running across an airport to catch me. He shook his head slow, and the disappointment in it was worse than any anger could have been. You want to know the part that should scare you, ma'am? If I'd been exactly who you thought I was, a broke guy in a cheap sweatshirt with nothing in the bag, you'd have thrown him off that plane and slept just fine tonight. You're not sorry you did it. You're sorry you did it to the wrong man. Diane opened her mouth. Nothing came out. You don't have to say anything, Ethan said, and started to turn away. Please. Her voice broke on the word. Please, I have 2 kids. This job is, if this goes the way I think it's going to go, I lose everything. I know that's not. I know I don't have the right to ask you for anything. But I'm begging you. Whatever you did with that phone call, whatever it was, please, I'm begging you, undo it. And there it was. The thing Ethan had known was coming from the second he'd heard her call his name. The plea, the tears, the 2 kids at home. And God help him, it worked on him a little, because he was not a cruel man, and he'd never in his life wanted to watch a mother cry. But then, he thought of something, and it stopped him cold. You have 2 kids, he said. Yes, I do. So do a lot of the people who fly in the back of your plane, Ethan said. The ones in the cheap seats, the ones in the hoodies. Every single one of them is somebody's mother, or somebody's father, or somebody's kid. And you looked at every one of them tonight, and you decided which ones counted. He let that sit there between them. You didn't grab a rich man by the collar and throw him off this plane, ma'am. You grabbed the man you thought had nobody. That's the part I can't undo for you. That's the part that's already done. He walked out through the automatic doors and into the cold, and he did not look back, and Diane Prescott stood alone in the middle of Terminal 4, with a galley tablet pressed against her chest, and the whole rest of her life rearranging itself around one decision she'd made in a second and a half. The story could have ended there. It didn't, because upstairs in the boardroom they'd finally reached him. Ethan's phone rang as the taxi pulled away from the curb, and he almost didn't answer it, but the number was Raymond's, so he did. Ethan. Raymond's voice was tight. I have to put you on with corporate. They've got the whole partnership desk on the line, and they are coming apart, man. The chief operating officer of the airline is on this call, personally, right now. He wants to talk to you, and I couldn't say no. You don't have to say a word if you don't want to, but they found you. There was a click, and then a new voice filled the line. Smooth controlled the voice of a man who ran a global airline and had never once in his career sounded like this, which was to say, terrified. Mr. Carter, my name is Daniel Reyes. I'm the Chief Operating Officer. First, before anything else, I want to say that I am aware in general terms of what happened on that aircraft tonight, and on behalf of this entire company, I am more sorry than I have words to tell you. You're aware in general terms, Ethan repeated. A pause. I'm told a member of our crew removed you from your seat. I'm told it was handled badly. Handled badly. Ethan looked out the taxi window at the lights sliding by. A woman grabbed me by the collar of my shirt, Mr. Reyes, while I was asleep. She woke me up to tell me I didn't belong in a seat I paid full fare for. When I said I wouldn't move, she called 2 police officers, and those 2 officers put their hands on me and marched me up the aisle in front of 40 people, and every one of those 40 people watched it happen, and most of them believed I deserved it. Because of a sweatshirt. Because of a backpack. He paused. Is that the general terms you were told about? The line was silent for a long moment. No, Daniel Reyes said finally, and to his credit, his voice had changed, something real had come into it. No, it isn't. And I want you to know I'm going to see all of it. Every second of it. There are apparently a great many recordings. There are. Mr. Carter? A breath. I have to be honest with you because I think you'd see through anything less. Yes, I am sick about what was done to you tonight as a man. And yes, I am also the chief operating officer of a company that is watching $52 billion of work freeze solid in real time. And every partner we have is calling to ask why, and 4 governments are calling to ask why, and the honest answer is that one of my employees threw the wrong man off an airplane. I can hold both of those things. I hope you can believe that I can hold both of those things. And Ethan in the back of the cab felt something he hadn't expected to feel, which was a flicker of respect. Because the man hadn't lied to him. The man hadn't pretended the money didn't matter. He'd put it all on the table. "I believe you can hold both of those things," Ethan said. "The question is, which one you're going to act on." "Tell me what you want," Daniel Reyes said. "Name it. I mean that. If it's a settlement, I don't want money." The pause on the line this time was different. Confused. A man like Daniel Reyes had spent his whole career in rooms where everything came down to a number, and here was a man he'd just wronged a man with the power to cost him $52 billion, and that man was telling him he didn't want the one thing every problem had ever been solved with. "I don't understand," Reyes admitted. "I know you don't," Ethan said. "That's the problem I'm trying to fix. Not with you personally, with all of it." He was quiet for a moment, watching the city go by. "I'll call you tomorrow, Mr. Reyes. Not tonight. Tonight I'm going home to my daughter. But I'll call you tomorrow, and we're going to talk about what it's going to take to unfreeze your program, and I promise you, it's going to cost your company a lot more than a check. Good night." He hung up before the man could answer, and 41 floors up, Daniel Reyes lowered his phone and looked around a boardroom full of frightened executives, and he said the words none of them wanted to hear. "He doesn't want money." Somebody actually laughed out of sheer disbelief. "Everybody wants money." "Not this one," Reyes said. "And that's what should scare you. Because a man you can pay is a man you can make go away. A man who doesn't want to be paid." He set the phone down on the long glass table. "A man who doesn't want to be paid wants to change you. And he's got 52 billion reasons why we're going to let him." Meanwhile, the videos had gone up. The first one hit at 9:40 that night, 38 seconds shot vertically from row 4, and the whole thing was there. Ethan rising slowly with his hands open. His voice calm and carrying. "I am not resisting. I want everyone to see this." The two officers taking his arms. And that final line clear as a bell over the silence of the cabin. "Because I didn't look like I belonged." Look. By 10 o'clock, it had 200,000 views. By 11, it had 1 million. By the time Ethan's taxi pulled up outside his sister's house, it had passed 4 million, and it was still climbing. And the comments underneath it had become something Ethan never could have engineered, and never would have asked for thousands upon thousands of people from every corner of the country telling their own version of the same story. "This happened to me. This happened to my dad. They did this to my son, and nobody recorded it. I've worn the hoodie. I know that look. I know exactly what that man felt." It had stopped being about Ethan Carter somewhere around the second million views. It had become about every person who'd ever walked into a room and watched somebody's face do the math and come up with nothing. Ethan didn't know any of that yet. Ethan was standing on his sister's porch, and the door was opening, and a small shape was hurtling across the entryway toward him. "Daddy!" He caught her. He caught his daughter and pulled her up against his chest and held on, and for the first time in 2 days, something in him that had been clenched tight finally let go, and he pressed his face into her hair and breathed her in. "Hi, baby," he said. "Hi, Lily Bean." "You're late," she informed him, pulling back to give him a stern 7-year-old look. "Aunt Sarah let me stay up, but only because it's you." "I know, I'm sorry. I got held up." He carried her inside. His sister Sarah was standing in the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed and her phone in her hand, and the look on her face told him everything. "You've seen it," he said quietly over Lily's head. "Ethan." Sarah's voice was low and strange. "You have 4 million people watching a video of 2 cops dragging you off an airplane. 4 million, Ethan. It's on the news. It's what happened." "What happened to you today?" "Not in front of her," Ethan said, and Sarah's mouth shut. He carried Lily up the stairs. He got her into bed. He sat on the edge of the mattress the way he'd sat 1,000 nights, and she looked up at him with those enormous, serious eyes, and she said the thing that ambushed him completely. "Aunt Sarah was watching a video of you on her phone," Lily said, "and she looked scared. Are you in trouble, Daddy?" And Ethan Carter, who had faced down a flight attendant and 2 police officers and 40 strangers, and the chief operating officer of a global airline, without his voice ever once shaking, felt his throat close up. "No, baby," he managed. "I'm not in trouble." Then why did some people be mean to you? Aunt Sarah wouldn't tell me. But I could tell it was a mean video. He looked at her for a long moment. And he decided the way a father decides that he wasn't going to lie to her because she'd asked him a true thing and she deserved a true answer. Some people looked at Daddy today, he said carefully, and they decided that because of the clothes I was wearing, I wasn't important. And they were unkind to me because of it. Do you remember what we talked about last week? After that boy said the thing about your clothes, Lily's face grew solemn. You said don't ever let anybody decide what you're worth. That's right. So did you let them? And there it was. The whole thing, the whole enormous impossible thing boiled down to a question from a 7-year-old in dinosaur pajamas. No, Ethan said, and his voice was steady, now steadier than it had been all night. No, baby, I didn't let them. I stood right where I had a right to stand, even when it was hard, even when everybody in the room thought I was wrong. He tucked the blanket up under her chin. And that's all I ever want you to do too. You hear me? You stand where you have a right to stand. Okay, Daddy. She yawned enormously. Did you win? He almost laughed. He almost cried. He smoothed her hair back off her forehead. I don't know yet, Lilybean, but I'm going to try to make it so nobody has to fight the way I fought today. That's what winning's going to look like, I think. She was already half asleep. That's a good win, she mumbled. Yeah, he said softly. Yeah, I think it might be. He sat with her until her breathing went slow and even, and then he went downstairs, and his sister was waiting for him at the kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee and a face full of questions, and his phone was lighting up on the counter with a number he recognized as Raymond's, and he knew the night was a long way from over. But upstairs, 300 miles away in a house Ethan had never seen another parent was awake too. Diane Prescott had made it home from the airport. Somehow, she barely remembered the drive, and she was sitting on the edge of her own kids' bunk beds, watching them sleep with her phone face down on her knee, because she couldn't stand to look at it anymore. It had the video on it. Everyone had the video on it. Her sister had called. 2 of the other flight attendants had called. And every single one of them had asked the same question in the same careful, horrified voice, Diane. Was that you, Diane? Please tell me that wasn't you. She'd worked 22 years for this. The house, the bunk beds, the good school her kids went to. She'd clawed her way up from a regional carrier flying puddle jumpers to senior crew on international first class, and she'd done it by being sharp, by being decisive, by knowing how to read a cabin. And tonight her greatest skill had reached across an aisle and grabbed the wrong man by the collar, and she understood sitting there in the dark, watching her children sleep, that the skill had never been a skill at all. It had been a habit of contempt she'd mistaken for insight. 22 years of it. And she had no idea, none how many people it had cost before tonight, because none of the others had been carrying $52 billion in a canvas bag. None of the others had been able to make the world care. She thought about what Ethan had said to her in the terminal. You're not sorry you did it. You're sorry you did it to the wrong man. She'd wanted to deny it. Standing there, she'd wanted so badly to deny it. She couldn't. That was the thing that kept her sitting on the edge of that bunk bed as the clock crept past midnight. Not the video, not the calls, not even the near certainty that she was going to lose her job. It was the small, cold, unbearable truth that the man in the hoodie had seen her more clearly in 20 minutes than she'd seen herself in 22 years. Her phone buzzed. She looked down at it without wanting to. An email from the airline. The subject line was 6 words long, and she read them 4 times before they arrived. Administrative leave. Effective immediately. Investigation pending. She set the phone down on the blanket. She watched her son turn over in his sleep. And Diane Prescott, senior crew, 22 years, began very quietly to cry in the dark so she wouldn't wake her children. Back in Sarah's kitchen, Ethan finally answered Raymond's call. Tell me, he said. It's bad, Raymond said. Or good. I honestly can't tell anymore, and I've been doing this for 15 years. The suspension held. Every partner on the program is frozen out of anything involving the carrier. But Ethan, it's not staying contained. Their stock is going to open tomorrow and it is going to fall through the floor. Analysts are already writing it up. And the video did something the suspension never could have. This stopped being a business story about an hour ago. Now it's a people story. Now every reporter in the country wants to know who the guy in the hoodie is, and it is only a matter of time, hours maybe, before somebody connects the man on that plane to the man who can turn a $52 billion program on and off like a light switch. And when that happens, it becomes the biggest story in the country, Ethan finished. When that happens, Raymond said quietly, you're not a private man anymore, Ethan. Not ever again. You understand what I'm telling you. Right now, you're the anonymous guy they were cruel to. The second your name gets out, you're the most powerful passenger who ever got thrown off a plane, and everybody in America is going to have an opinion about what you do next. There's no more going home quiet after this. That door's closing tonight. Ethan was silent for a long moment. He looked across the kitchen at his sister, who was pretending not to listen and hearing every word. He thought about Lily asleep upstairs, asking him, did you win? Let it close, he said. Ethan, I mean it, Raymond. I spent my whole life keeping my head down, building things and letting other people take the podium. Being nobody on purpose, because my father taught me that a man doesn't need the world to know who he is. He turned and looked out the dark kitchen window at his own reflection. And you know what? That got me. It got me a flight attendant who grabbed me by the collar because she was sure, totally sure, that nobody would ever come looking for a man like me. She wasn't wrong to think it. That's the part that keeps eating at me. For most men in that hoodie, she'd have been right. So what are you saying? I'm saying let the door close, Ethan said. Let them find out who I am. Because maybe the only good thing my name can do in this world is make sure the next guy in the cheap seats gets treated like he might be somebody. Even when he's not. Especially when he's not. He took a breath. Set up the call with Reyes for tomorrow morning. And Raymond, I want 3 other people in that room. Who? A retired federal judge named Harold Whitfield. He was on the plane. He stood up for me when nobody else would, before he had any idea who I was, which is the only reason I trust him. Ethan's jaw tightened. The flight attendant, Diane Prescott. I want her in that room, and I want her to hear every word. Raymond hesitated. And the third? Ethan was quiet for a moment. The next guy, he said finally. I don't have his name yet, but before this is over, I'm going to find somebody this happened to who didn't have $52 billion in a bag. Somebody who got dragged off a plane and just had to take it because nobody was ever coming for him. And I'm going to put him in that room too. Because this was never about me, Raymond. I had a phone call that could stop the world. What I want to know, his voice dropped low and hard and certain, is what we're going to build so that the ones who don't have that phone call never need it in the first place. The line was quiet. You've changed since this morning, Raymond said softly. No, Ethan said. I think I finally stopped hiding. He glanced at the clock on the stove. Past midnight now. A new day, technically the day everything was going to break open. Get me that room, Raymond. 9 a.m., all of them. He hung up. He set the phone down on the counter, and his sister reached across the table and put her hand over his, and neither of them said anything for a long moment, because there wasn't anything to say that the day hadn't already said louder. 300 miles north, the airline's stock ticker sat frozen at yesterday's close, waiting for a morning that was going to erase $11 billion of market value in the first 9 minutes of trading. In a boardroom on the 41st floor, Daniel Reyes had sent everyone home and was sitting alone at the long glass table, watching the 38-second video for the 9th time, stopping it every time on the same frame. The man, rising hands, opened that terrible calm on his face and asking himself how his entire 90-year-old company had come to hang by a thread held in the hand of a single father he'd never met. In a quiet house in the suburbs, a flight attendant sat awake beside her sleeping children with an email on her phone that had ended 22 years of her life. And in his sister's kitchen, Ethan Carter finished his coffee, climbed the stairs, and cracked open his daughter's bedroom door to look at her one more time before he slept. The reason he'd stayed in the seat, the reason he'd made the call, the reason all of it mattered. She was fast asleep, one arm flung over the stuffed rabbit, utterly at peace, with no idea at all that somewhere out in the dark, her father's name was catching fire, and that by the time she woke up for school, the whole country would know it. She woke up at 6:15, and the country already knew his name. It happened while Ethan slept, the way these things always happen now, in the dark hours when nobody's watching and everybody's watching at once. Some reporter in a newsroom cross-referenced the flight manifest with a leaked partnership document, and there it was in black and white, connecting the man in the hoodie to the man whose signature could stop $52 billion cold. By 4 in the morning, it had a headline. By 5, it had 100 headlines. By the time Ethan came downstairs in a t-shirt with his hair still wet from the shower, his sister was standing at the kitchen counter, holding her phone like it might go off in her hand. "Ethan," Sarah said, "it's out. Your name's out. It's everywhere." He took the phone from her. He read the headline. He read it twice. And then he set the phone face down on the counter and stood there for a moment with both hands flat on the cold granite, and Sarah watched her brother absorb the death of the last private morning he would ever have. "You okay?" she asked quietly. "I don't know yet," he said, which was the truth. He looked toward the stairs. "Is she up?" "Not yet." "Good." He straightened. "I want to get her to school before this, before all of it gets to her. She's got a spelling test today. She practiced all week." And there was something so ordinary in it, so painfully human. This man, with the whole country roaring outside his sister's front door, worried about a 7-year-old's spelling test, that Sarah had to turn away and busy herself with the coffee so he wouldn't see her face. They got Lily up. They got her dressed. She ate her cereal and quizzed herself on her spelling words with her mouth full, and Ethan sat across from her and listened and corrected her on neighbor. And for 11 minutes at that kitchen table, the world was small and safe and exactly the size of his daughter's voice. Then his phone started ringing, and it didn't stop. Raymond first, then a number he didn't recognize, then another, then Raymond again, and this time Ethan stepped out onto the back porch to take it, pulling the door shut behind him so Lily wouldn't hear. "It's a circus," Raymond said, and he sounded like he hadn't slept. "There are 3 news vans outside the program headquarters." "Somebody got your sister's address?" "No." "Don't panic. They don't have it yet. But they will." "Ethan, they will by noon. The stock opened 11 minutes ago, and it's already down 14% and falling. And every single outlet in the country is running the same 2 words under your picture. You want to know what they are?" "Not really." "Billionaire architect," Raymond said. "That's you now. That's who you are to 200 million people who'd never heard your name yesterday. The quiet guy who built things and let other people take the podium, he's gone, man. He died at 4 a.m. You're the billionaire architect they threw off a plane." Ethan closed his eyes and leaned against the porch rail. "Is the room set for 9? "That's the other thing." Raymond paused. "Ray has agreed to everything. Everything, Ethan. He's bringing whoever you want." Judge Whitfield said yes. Before I finished the sentence, the man practically shouted. It said he'd been waiting for this call since he sat back down in his seat last night. But the flight attendant? Prescott. She got put on administrative leave last night, automated. And when my assistant called her this morning to invite her to the meeting, she thought it was a prank. Then she thought it was a trap. She said, and I'm quoting her, she said, "Why would he want me in the room so everybody can watch him destroy me?" She's terrified, Ethan. She thinks she's being summoned to her own execution. Ethan was quiet for a moment, looking out over his sister's small backyard, the swing set, the patch of grass gone brown at the edges. "Tell her she's wrong," he said finally. "Tell her I don't want to destroy her. Tell her he searched for it. Tell her I want her to understand something and that she's the only person who can help me make sure it never happens again. Tell her that. And Raymond, if she still says no, don't push. A woman that scared you, don't drag her anywhere. But I think she'll come." "Why?" "Because." Ethan said, somewhere under all that fear is a person who knows exactly what she did. And people who know what they did, the real ones, not the ones who've buried it, they can't stay away from the chance to face it. I saw it on her face in the terminal last night. She wanted to run, but she also wanted to know if there was any way back. I'm going to give her the chance to find out. He pushed off the rail. Set it for 9. I've got to take my daughter to school. He drove Lily to school in his sister's car with a baseball cap pulled low, and nobody looked at him twice because in that parking lot full of minivans, he was just another tired dad in a cap dropping his kid off before work, which was the last hour of his life. Anyone would ever mistake him for that. He walked her to the door. He crouched down and fixed the strap on her backpack, a small pink one, not frayed. He'd made sure of that, and he held her by the shoulders and looked at her. You're going to crush that spelling test, he told her. I know, she said with the total confidence of a 7-year-old who'd practiced. And after school, Aunt Sarah's going to pick you up, okay? Not me. I've got some grown-up things I have to do today, but I'll be there tonight to hear all about it. Every word. Even neighbor. Especially neighbor. She hugged him around the neck, fierce and quick, and then she was gone, swallowed up into the bright noise of the school. And Ethan stayed crouched there for a second longer than he needed to. And then he stood, and he got back in the car, and he drove toward the city, and everything waiting in it. The meeting was on the 38th floor of a building that wasn't the airline's chosen, deliberately neutral ground. Raymond's idea, so that no one walked in feeling they already owned the room. Ethan arrived at 8:50. He'd changed out of the hoodie, but not into anything a man would call armor. A plain button-down. No tie. He walked into that conference room looking almost exactly like what he was, which was a working man who'd been up too many nights, and the 3 people already seated at the long table turned to look at him, and the reactions told him everything about each of them. Judge Harold Whitfield rose to his feet the moment Ethan came through the door and crossed the room and took his hand in both of his. Son, he said, and his voice was thick. I have thought about you every hour since I got off that plane. I want you to know, I filed a formal statement with the airline's legal department at 6 o'clock this morning, unsolicited, describing everything I witnessed. Whatever happens in this room, that statement stands. You had a witness on that plane. You have one now. Thank you, Your Honor, Ethan said. For last night more than this morning. You stood up when you didn't know who I was. That's the only reason I asked you here. Daniel Reyes stood next. The chief operating officer looked like a man who'd aged 5 years in a night because $11 billion had walked out of his company's value before his second cup of coffee, and it was still walking. He extended his hand and Ethan took it. Mr. Carter, Reyes said. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being willing to be in a room with us at all. And then there was the 4th chair at the far end, drawn back a little from the table, as if its occupant were trying to be somewhere else entirely. Diane Prescott had come. She was out of uniform in a gray cardigan that made her look smaller than she had on the plane, and she would not lift her eyes from the table. Her hands were folded in her lap and white at the knuckles. She had come. Ethan understood purely on faith and terror in equal measure, and she was sitting there braced for the worst thing she could imagine, which was to be humiliated in front of these powerful men, the way she'd humiliated him in front of the cabin. Ethan did not sit at the head of the table. He noticed the room expected him to the power seat, the architect, the man with 52 billion reasons to sit wherever he pleased. Instead, he pulled out the chair directly across from Diane at the far end, and sat down in it, so that the first thing he did in that room was put himself at eye level with the person everyone else had come to watch him crush. Ms. Prescott, he said quietly. She flinched and finally looked up. I want to tell you why you're here, Ethan said, because I think you spent all night thinking it was to be punished. It isn't. Nobody in this room is going to raise their voice at you. Nobody's going to make a speech about what you did. You already know what you did. You've known since about 8:30 last night, and I'd guess you didn't sleep, and I'm sorry for that. I am not sorry it happened, but sorry. It's the kind of pain that keeps a person up. He paused. You're here because you're the only one who can answer a question I've been carrying around since I was a kid, and I've never once been able to ask the person it needs asking of. Will you answer it? You can say no. Diane's throat worked. What's the question? She managed. When you looked at me on that plane, Ethan said, before you knew a single thing about me, what did you see? Not what you're supposed to say now. Not the sorry version. The real one. What did you actually see when you looked at the man in the hoodie? The room was so quiet you could hear the building's air moving, and Diane Prescott, to the surprise of every person at that table, did not give the safe answer. Maybe she was too tired to perform. Maybe she'd used up all her lies in the dark the night before. Whatever it was, when she finally spoke, it came out raw and true. I saw someone who didn't matter, she said, and her voice broke on it. I saw someone I could move. I looked at you, and I thought that one won't fight back. That one doesn't have anybody I can put my problem on him, and it'll go away, because who's ever going to care what happened to a man like that? She was crying now openly, not the pretty kind. And the thing I can't, the thing that's killing me, is that I didn't even decide it. It wasn't a choice. It was just automatic. 22 years of just looking at people and sorting them, and I never once thought of it as cruel. I thought it was good at my job. I thought I could read people. She pressed a hand to her mouth. And it took throwing the most powerful man on the plane off the plane for me to find out that the thing I was proud of my whole career was I was just deciding who counted. Over and over. For 22 years. And I have no idea how many people I did it to before you. That's the part. That's the part I can't live with. Because you're the only one who could make it a story. All the rest of them just had to take it and go home. She put her face in her hands, and nobody at that table moved, because they had all just watched something happen that no lawsuit and no settlement and no press release could have produced. A person saying the truest and worst thing about themselves out loud in a room to the face of the one they'd wronged. Ethan let the silence hold for a moment. Then he said gently, "Thank you. That took more guts than staying calm on that plane took me, and I mean that." She looked up startled. "You want to know the thing I couldn't say to you in the terminal last night?" Ethan went on. "Because I was too angry and too tired and honestly too hurt. Here it is. I don't hate you, Ms. Prescott. I hated what you did. I hated it more than I've hated anything in a long time. But you sitting there telling the truth like that, when you could have hidden behind, I was just following procedure, you're not a monster. That's what makes it so much worse, actually. If you were a monster, this would be simple. Fire the monster, problem solved. But you're not. You're a regular person who spent 22 years doing a cruel thing without ever once feeling it as cruel. And that," he turned and looked down the table at Reyes, at the judge. "That's the problem I want to fix. Because there are 100,000 of her out there. Good people, regular people, doing the automatic thing without ever feeling it. And you can't fire your way out of 100,000 people." Daniel Reyes had gone very still. "So what do you want?" Reyes said slowly. And Ethan Carter leaned forward, and for the first time since he'd walked into the room, the working man in the plain button-down looked like exactly what he also was, the architect, the man who built enormous complicated systems and made them run. "I want to build you a new one," he said. "A new what?" "A new system. That's what I do, Mr. Reyes. I don't give speeches and I don't sue people. I build systems that make it easier to do the right thing than the wrong thing, because I figured out a long time ago that you can't fix people by yelling at them. You have to change the thing around them until the right thing becomes the easy thing." He tapped the table once with a finger. "Right now, in your airline, when a passenger like Gregory Vance throws a tantrum, the easiest thing your crew can do is find the weakest person on the plane and move them. It's fast, it's quiet. Nobody important complains. The whole system is built to funnel the cost of a rich man's anger onto the back of a poor man's dignity. And it does it so smoothly that a good woman like Ms. Prescott can do it for 22 years and call it being good at her job." He shook his head. "You don't have a bad apple problem, Mr. Reyes. You have a design problem. And I fix design problems for a living. The room was silent. Keep going, Reyes said quietly. Here's my offer, Ethan said. I unfreeze your program, today. All $52 billion of it starts moving again the moment we sign. Your stock stops the bleeding. Your partners stand down. Your governments go back to sleep. And this becomes from a business standpoint. One very bad night that you recovered from. You could feel the whole table lean toward him. But, Ethan said, and let the words sit there. In exchange, you don't write me a check, not a dollar. Instead, you let me redesign how your airline handles conflict on an aircraft from the ground up. Independent passenger advocacy, a real one, with teeth, not a suggestion box. Mandatory retraining that isn't a video somebody clicks through, but training that shows a crew member exactly what it costs a human being to be treated the way I was treated. Transparent investigation of every complaint published, so the pattern can't hide anymore. And a hard rule, a hard one, that no passenger gets removed from an aircraft by force without a documented lawful reason that would hold up in front of that man right there. He nodded at Judge Whitfield. Not the crew asked. A reason. In writing. Before hands go on anybody. Reyes was quiet for a long moment. Then, you understand that will cost us a great deal of money. Not $52 billion. But a great deal. I'm counting on it, Ethan said. Because a thing that costs money is a thing a company actually does. A thing that's free is a thing they announce and forget. I want this to cost you enough that you can't forget it. He leaned back. And there's one more condition. The one that's not negotiable. Name it. Ethan looked down the table at Diane Prescott. She keeps her job. Diane's head came up so fast it was almost violent. What? You heard me. Ethan didn't look away from her. You keep your job. On one condition of your own, that you help me build the training. Not sit through it. Build it. Because you're the only person in this whole mess who can stand up in front of a room full of flight attendants and say, I did this for 22 years, and I never once felt it. And here's exactly how it happens, and here's what it cost, and here's the man I did it to. His voice was steady and certain. A stranger lecturing them changes nothing. You changed the second you had to look me in the eye and say the true thing out loud. So you're going to be the one who makes them look. That's the deal. That's how you make it right. Not by disappearing. By turning the worst thing you ever did into the reason it stops happening. Diane Prescott stared at him across the length of that table, and her whole face came apart, because it was the last thing on earth she'd expected. Not mercy. Mercy she could have understood, but use. A purpose. A way to make the unbearable thing mean something. Why? She whispered. Why would you do that for me? After what I'm not doing it for you, Ethan said, and it wasn't unkind, it was just true. I'm doing it for the next man in the hoodie. You're the best tool I've got to protect him, because you're living proof that a decent person can do a terrible thing on autopilot for 2 decades. Nobody's going to believe a saint telling them to be better. They'll believe you. He softened just slightly. But I won't pretend it doesn't help you too. It does. You get to spend the rest of your career undoing the thing instead of drowning in it. That's not nothing, Ms. Prescott. Take the deal. And Diane Prescott, 22 years senior crew, the woman who could read a cabin, put her face down on the conference table and wept and nodded and could not get a single word out and did not need to. Judge Whitfield reached over and put a hand on her shoulder. This woman who'd been on the wrong side of him 12 hours ago, and he said low, "That's a good deal, ma'am. Take it from a man who spent 30 years handing down the other kind. That's the best deal you're ever going to be offered in your life." Daniel Reyes sat at the middle of the table, and he looked at the man across from him. The man he'd been braced all night to negotiate with, to placate to buy off the man he'd assumed would want a pound of flesh and a headline. And something in his face changed. Something loosened that had been clenched since 4 a.m. "Mr. Carter," he said, "I came into this room this morning to save my company. I want you to know I'm going to walk out of it wanting to build the thing you just described, whether it saves the company or not. I don't say things like that. I'm not a man who says things like that. But you—" He shook his head slowly. "You didn't come here to take anything from us. You came here to hand us a better version of ourselves and make us pay for it. In 30 years of business, I have never once seen anybody do that." "That's because most people who get power," Ethan said quietly, "spend it getting even. I've got a 7-year-old at home who asked me last night if I won. And I realized the only answer I could stand to give her was one where winning meant the next kid's dad doesn't get dragged off a plane. Getting even doesn't get me that answer. This does." He stood then and extended his hand across the table, and Daniel Reyes rose and took it, and it was done. The biggest crisis in the airline's 90-year history, resolved not with a check, but with a handshake and a promise, and every person in that room knew they'd been part of something they'd tell their grandchildren about. But it wasn't quite over. Because as the meeting broke and the lawyers began filing in to draw up the terms, Ethan pulled Raymond aside by the window out of earshot. "Did you find him?" Ethan asked low. Raymond hesitated. "Find who?" "The next guy. Last night. I asked you to find somebody this happened to who didn't have what I had. Somebody who got dragged off and just had to take it. Did you find him?" Raymond's face did something complicated. "Ethan, I found more than one. I put out 2 quiet inquiries last night, and by this morning I had over 400 responses. 400 Ethan in 8 hours, and that's just the people who happened to see it and happened to reach out. Same airline, same story, different faces. A woman traveling with a disabled son. A man who didn't speak much English. A kid in a wheelchair who got moved so a frequent flyer could have the bulkhead. None of them had a lawyer. None of them had a video. All of them just took it and went home and told themselves that's how it works." Ethan stood very still at the window 38 floors up, looking out at the city. 400, he said. "And those are just the ones who saw the news and connected it to themselves. The real number—" Raymond didn't finish. "The real number is every person who ever wore the hoodie," Ethan said softly. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned from the window, and there was something new in his face, something that had been forming since 4 a.m., since Lily asked him, "Did you win?" since Diane wept into a conference table. "This isn't one airline, is it?" he said. It wasn't really a question. One airline was just the one that grabbed the wrong man. But it's every airline. It's the buses and the trains and the doctor's office and the bank and the courtroom and the school. It's everywhere a person with a little power looks at a person with less and decides in a second and a half that they don't count. "Ethan," Raymond said carefully, "what are you thinking?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked back across the room at Diane Prescott wiping her face and squaring her shoulders at Judge Whitfield, already talking animatedly with a lawyer at Daniel Reyes, shaking hands with the future he hadn't known he wanted an hour ago. And he thought about 400 emails, and he thought about his daughter's small pink backpack, the one he'd made sure wasn't frayed. "I'm thinking," Ethan said slowly, "that I've spent 6 years building systems that move airplanes and cargo and money around the world. And I never once used any of it to move the only thing that actually matters." He looked at Raymond. "I've got $52 billion of leverage, and a name the whole country learned this morning, and 400 people who just found out they're not alone. That's not a bad night, Raymond. That's a foundation." "You want to start something?" "I want to start something," Ethan agreed. "And I think it starts with those 400 people. Not as a lawsuit. As I don't know what to call it yet. A place where the next man in the hoodie has a phone number, too. Where he doesn't need to be secretly a billionaire to get somebody to pick up." He almost smiled. "Every one of those 400 people spent last night watching a video and thinking finally somebody like me got heard. I don't want to be the exception that made them feel better for one night. I want to be the reason it stops being an exception." Raymond looked at him for a long moment. "You know, the second you do this, you're never going back to being a quiet man who builds things. This makes it permanent. You become the guy. Forever." "I know," Ethan said. "You're sure?" Ethan thought about a hand on his collar. He thought about 40 faces deciding who he was. He thought about a little girl in dinosaur pajamas asking if he'd won, and the answer he wanted to be able to give her. Not "I got even, but I made it, so it can't happen to you." Raymond. He said, "Yesterday, a woman grabbed me by the shirt because she was sure nobody would ever come looking for a man like me. And the worst part? The part I couldn't stop thinking about all night is that for almost everybody who's ever been in my seat, she'd have been right. No one comes. No one ever comes." His jaw set. "I'm going to be the one who comes. For all 400 of them. And for however many come after." He picked up his phone off the windowsill. He had 140 missed calls and a country full of people who wanted a piece of him, and he ignored every single one, and he called the only number that had mattered to him all day. His sister answered on the second ring. "Ethan, are you okay? It's everywhere. It's on every channel." "I'm okay," he said, and for the first time all day he actually was. "Sarah, is Lily out of school yet?" 20 minutes. "I'm on my way to get her now." "Ethan, what happened in there, are you?" "Tell her I'm coming," Ethan said. "Tell her I'm going to be there when she gets out, standing right at the door." "And Sarah?" His voice caught just slightly. "Ask her how the spelling test went. Ask her about neighbor. Tell her her dad wants to know before he wants to know anything else in the whole world." He hung up, and he walked back into the room full of lawyers and executives and the woman he'd saved and the judge who'd defended him. And he told them he'd be back in 2 hours to sign every page they had. But that right now at 3:15 on the afternoon, the whole country learned his name. There was a 7-year-old getting out of school who'd practiced the word neighbor all week, and there was exactly one place on earth Ethan Carter intended to be when she came through those doors. And not one person in that room, not the billionaire's lawyers, or the airline's chief operating officer, or a retired federal judge said a single word to stop him. He got there with 4 minutes to spare. He stood at the door of the school with his baseball cap pulled low. One dad among a dozen dads, and when the doors opened and the flood of children came pouring out, Lily spotted him from 30 feet away, and her whole face lit up like something switched on inside her, and she ran backpack bouncing and slammed into his legs and shouted the only thing that mattered to him in the entire world at that moment. "I got 100, I spelled neighbor, and because and beautiful, and I got 100 daddy." And Ethan Carter, billionaire architect, the man whose name had erased $11 billion of market value that morning. The man 400 strangers were praying to dropped to his knees on the school pavement and pulled his daughter into his chest and held on like she was the only solid thing in a spinning world, which that afternoon she was. 100, he said into her hair. 100. You crushed it. I told you you would. I know, she said, muffled and pleased against his shoulder. Can we get ice cream? We can get all the ice cream, Ethan said. We can get so much ice cream they run out. They got ice cream. And for 2 hours, 2 entire hours, while his phone sat face down and silent in his pocket, while a country full of reporters and lawyers and executives waited on the man who was ignoring every one of them. Ethan Carter was nobody's architect, and nobody's hero, and nobody's cause. He was a dad with sticky fingers, listening to a 7-year-old explain the plot of a cartoon in exhaustive, breathless detail. And he understood sitting in that little ice cream shop that this was the thing. This was the whole thing. This was what he'd stayed in the seat to protect, what he'd made the phone call, to protect what he was about to reorganize his entire life, to protect not the money, not the vindication, but the simple animal right of an ordinary man to sit somewhere he'd earned and be at peace with the small people he loved. Nobody was ever going to take that from anyone if he could help it. That night, after Lily was asleep, he sat at Sarah's kitchen table and finally turned the phone back over, and the world came flooding back in. The airline had signed. Every page. The lawyers had worked through the afternoon, and the deal was done. The program unfrozen, the $52 billion flowing again, and locked into the same document in language with real teeth every reform Ethan had demanded. Independent passenger advocacy. Mandatory retraining. Transparent published investigations. And the hard rule, no forced removal without a documented lawful cause. Daniel Reyes had signed his name to all of it, And then Raymond reported had sat alone in the empty conference room for 20 minutes afterward, and no one knew quite why. The stock had stopped falling at 2:40 that afternoon, right around the time Ethan noted that he'd been on his knees on a school sidewalk. It hadn't recovered, but it had stopped bleeding. And the story in the press had begun over the course of a single day to turn. Because here was the thing, nobody in that boardroom had predicted. When the news broke that the billionaire architect had refused every dollar of settlement that he'd traded, $52 billion in leverage, not for money, but for reform, not for revenge, but for a system that would protect the next man in the hoodie. Something happened in the country that no PR firm could have manufactured. The story stopped being about an airline. It stopped even being about Ethan. It became about the 400. Because Raymond's quiet inquiry had not stayed quiet. "You need to see this," Sarah said, and slid her phone across the table. It was a video. Not the one from the plane, a new one. A woman, maybe 40, sitting in what looked like her own living room, talking into her phone camera with her voice shaking. And she was telling a story. Her story. 3 years ago, on the same airline traveling with her son, who had autism, who'd needed the bulkhead row for the extra space, who'd had a meltdown when a gate agent moved them so a platinum member could have the seat. She'd never told anyone the whole story, she said, because who would care? Because she'd convinced herself it was just how things worked. And then she'd seen the man in the hoodie, and she'd realized she wasn't crazy. She'd realized it had been wrong the whole time. The video had 2 million views, and underneath it were the others. Hundreds of them now, thousands, a rising tide of people looking into their phone cameras and telling the thing they'd carried alone. The man who didn't speak much English, telling his story in Spanish with subtitles. The college kid who'd been moved out of a seat his dying grandmother had bought him. The Army veteran in the wheelchair. Each one small. Each one on its own, the kind of thing the world lets slide. But together they were becoming something Ethan had not started, and could not stop and did not want to. "They're calling it something," Sarah said quietly. "The hashtag. It's trending everywhere. You want to know what it is?" Ethan looked up from the phone. "I stayed in the seat," she said. "That's what they're calling it. Because of what you did. Because you didn't get up. Every one of these people, every single one, is posting about the time they did get up, the time they moved, the time they took it and went home. And they're all saying the same thing, Ethan. They're all saying, next time I stay in the seat." Ethan set the phone down very carefully, like it had become heavy. He hadn't cried through any of it. Not when Diane grabbed his collar. Not in the terminal with his hands shaking. Not when the country learned his name at 4 a.m. But he sat at his sister's kitchen table now, at 11 o'clock at night, reading the words of hundreds of strangers who'd found the courage to say the thing out loud. Because a tired dad in a hoodie hadn't stood up, and his eyes filled, and he let them. "I didn't do this," he said hoarsely. "Sarah, I didn't. I just refused to move from a chair, that's all I did. I refused to give up a seat I paid for." "How did that become—" He gestured helplessly at the phone. "This." And his sister, who'd known him his whole life, who'd watched him build things quietly in the dark for 6 years without ever once wanting the credit, reached over and put her hand on his. "Because for once," she said, "one of us didn't get up. And everybody who ever got up needed to see that it was possible not to. That's all people ever need, Ethan. They need to see one person do the thing they were told couldn't be done. You were the one. You didn't mean to be. But you were." His phone buzzed. "Raymond." He answered. "I saw it," he said before Raymond could speak. "The hashtag. The videos. I saw all of it." "That's not why I'm calling," Raymond said. And there was something strange in his voice, something careful, something Ethan hadn't heard from him before in 15 years of working together. "Ethan, I've got somebody who wants to talk to you. And before you say no, because I know you want to be done for the night. I know you want to be with your kid. I need you to hear who it is first." "Who?" Raymond took a breath. "Gregory Vance." The name landed like a stone. For a second, Ethan couldn't place it, and then it came back all at once. The man in 3C. The broken recliner. The tantrum that started the whole thing. The man who'd sat there watching Ethan get dragged up the aisle with a look of open satisfaction, already reaching for the seat that wasn't his. "No," Ethan said flatly. "Ethan, that man is the reason any of this happened. He threw a fit about a recliner, and a woman decided the cost of it should come out of my hide. I've got nothing to say to him, and there's nothing he can say to me. No. He's not calling to defend himself," Raymond said quietly. "Ethan, listen to me. He's calling because, and I'm going to say this the way he said it to me, because I don't think I can improve on it. He's calling because he watched the video of himself. The one from the cabin. Somebody caught him in the background reaching for your seat with that look on his face, and it's gone viral on its own now, separate from yours. Millions of people. And he told me a grown man, Ethan, and he could barely get it out. He told me his daughter saw it. His teenage daughter. And she looked at him, and she asked him if that was really him, and he said the worst part of the whole thing wasn't the strangers online. It was that he couldn't figure out how to explain to his own kid why he'd looked so happy watching a man get hurt." Ethan was silent. "He's not asking for forgiveness," Raymond said. "He was very clear about that. He said he hasn't earned it, and he's not going to ask for it. He wants to say something to you. And he asked me to tell you that if you say no, he understands completely, and he'll never contact you again. But he wanted the chance to say it. That's all." Ethan looked across the kitchen at the stairs at the top of which his daughter was sleeping. The daughter who'd gotten 100 on her spelling test. The daughter who'd asked him, "Did you win?" And he thought about what winning was supposed to look like. And he thought about Diane Prescott weeping into a conference table, and how he'd told her she wasn't a monster, that the terrible truth was that she was a regular person who'd done a terrible thing on autopilot. And he thought about how easy it would be, how satisfying, how justified to let Gregory Vance twist. "Put him on," Ethan said. There was a click, and then a voice. And it was not the voice from the plane, not the imperious, complaining, entitled voice that had demanded a working seat like it was owed to him by God. It was a smaller voice, a wrecked one. "Mr. Carter," Gregory Vance said. Are you there?" "I'm here." A long, shaking breath came down the line. "I didn't think you'd take the call. I told your man I didn't deserve for you to take it. I still don't." He stopped. Started again. "I'm not going to waste your time with a long I know. You've got a kid, he told me you've got a little girl. I've got kids too. I know it's late. So I'll just say it." Another breath. "I've watched myself in that video about 100 times today. That look on my face while they dragged you up that aisle. And Mr. Carter, I need you to know I didn't recognize the man in that video. I looked at him and I thought, who is that? Who is that person who's happy about this? And then I realized it was me. It's been me for years probably. I just never had to see it before." Ethan said nothing. He let the man talk. "My daughter's 15. Vance went on and his voice cracked. "She saw it. She goes to school with kids whose parents watched it too. And last night she came into my office and she stood in the doorway and she said, 'Dad, was that you on the plane?' And I—" He stopped. Ethan could hear him fighting to keep it together. "I couldn't answer her. I stood there in front of my own child, and I could not open my mouth, because there was no version of the truth that didn't make me somebody I didn't want her to know I was. And that's Mr. Carter. That's when it hit me. That's when the whole thing hit me. It wasn't the recliner. It was never about the recliner. I've spent my whole life walking through the world like everybody in it was staff. Like the whole point of other people was to make my day smoother. And it took my 15-year-old standing in a doorway to make me see it. And I have you to thank for that, which is an insane thing to say to a man I helped get thrown off a plane. But there it is. I don't know how else to say it." The kitchen was very quiet. "Why are you telling me this?" Ethan said finally, not cruelly. He asked it the way he'd asked Diane the true question in the conference room, because he wanted the real answer, not the performed one. "Because I owe you the words," Gregory Vance said simply. "I can't undo the day. I can't give you back what happened in front of all those people, But I can at least be a man about it and say to your face, well to your ear, that I watched you get hurt, and I was glad, and I was wrong, and I'm ashamed, and I'm sorry. And you can do whatever you want with that. You can tell me to go to hell. You'd be right to. I just wasn't going to be the kind of man who let another person take all the consequences for something I helped cause. Not anymore. I'm done being that man. My daughter deserves better than that man. A pause. You deserved better than that man. And Ethan Carter closed his eyes, and he thought about the strangeness of it, that the tantrum in 3C, the pure ugly entitlement that had started this entire avalanche, had circled all the way around and come back as this. A broken man on a phone at 11 at night, undone not by the internet, but by his own teenage daughter in a doorway. Mr. Vance, Ethan said, I want to tell you something, and I need you to actually hear it, because I think you're in a place tonight where you might not. He leaned forward on his elbows. I'm not going to tell you it's okay. It's not okay. What you did, the tantrum, and worse, the look on your face that was real, and it hurt, and I'm not going to paper over it to make you feel better. But I'll tell you what I told the flight attendant this morning, because it's just as true for you. You're not a monster. And I know that's not comfortable, because a monster gets to be somebody else. A monster's easy. What you found out today is so much worse. You found out you're a regular man who let himself become careless with other people's dignity, a little at a time for years, until you didn't even feel it anymore. And here's the only thing that matters about tonight. He paused. You felt it, finally. That's not nothing. Most men who are what you were never feel it once in their whole lives. Your daughter did that. Hold on to her, and spend the rest of your life proving to her that the man in that video isn't the man she's got for a father. Gregory Vance was crying now, openly 3 states away and not trying to hide it. I don't know why you're being kind to me. I wouldn't be in your shoes. I'm not being kind to you, Ethan said, and it was the same thing he'd said to Diane, and it was the same truth. I'm being kind to your daughter, and to my daughter, because I've got a little girl upstairs who's going to grow up in a world full of grown men, and I'd rather that world have one more father in it who learned the lesson than one more man I broke for sport. That's all this is. It was never about you. He was quiet a moment. Go be better, Mr. Vance. Not for me, for the 15-year-old in the doorway. Good night. He hung up, and he sat there at the kitchen table with his sister watching him, and neither of them said anything for a long moment until Sarah said softly, You could have torn him apart. He handed you the knife. He'd have taken it. I know, Ethan said. Why didn't you? Ethan turned the phone over in his hands. Because a year from now that man is either going to be somebody who got destroyed by the internet and learned nothing except that he got caught, or he's going to be a father who changed. And the difference between those two men isn't what happens to him. He looked up at his sister. It's what happens to his kid. I couldn't save every person that woman moved off a plane for 22 years. But maybe I just saved one 15-year-old from growing up watching her father teach her that some people don't count. That's a win too, Sarah. It's a quiet one. Nobody's going to hashtag it. But it's a win. 2 days passed, then a week. And the story which everyone assumed would burn hot and die the way these things die, did not die. It grew. Because the reforms weren't just a press release. Ethan made sure of that, personally showing up at the airline's headquarters day after day, in his plain button-downs, sitting in rooms full of executives and lawyers, and increasingly ordinary employees building the thing he'd promised. And the centerpiece of it, the part nobody could stop talking about, was the training. Because Diane Prescott had said yes. She'd said yes, and then she'd done something nobody expected, least of all herself. She'd stood up in front of the first room of flight attendants, 200 of them, senior crew people she'd flown with for years, people who now all knew exactly what she'd done, and she had not read from a script. She'd stood up there, and she'd told them the truth. All of it. The collar, the certainty, the 22 years of sorting people into who mattered and who didn't, and calling it a sixth sense. And then she'd played the video. And then she'd said the thing that Ethan, watching from the back of the room, knew was going to change more people than any policy ever could. "I need you to understand," Diane had said, her voice steady even as her hands shook, "that I am not up here because I'm the worst of you. I'm up here because I might be the most normal of you. I never thought I was cruel, not once in 22 years. I thought I was good at my job, and that's the whole point. That's the entire point. The cruelty doesn't feel like cruelty from the inside. It feels like competence. It feels like reading the room. And the only reason I'm standing here instead of still doing it is that I happen to pick the one man on earth who could make the world watch. Every one of you has a man in a hoodie in your future. I am begging you see him. Before it's the wrong one. See him when he's the right one, when he's nobody, when there's no camera and no consequence, because that's the only time it actually counts." There wasn't a sound in the room when she finished, and Ethan at the back watched 200 hardened flight attendants sit in total silence, and he knew the way. He knew when a system was going to work that she'd reached them. Not all of them. You never reach all of them. But enough. Enough to matter. Afterward in the hallway, Diane found him. "I didn't think I could do that," she said. "I threw up before I went in. Twice." "But you did it." "I did it." She looked at him, and there was something different in her face now, something that had been growing over the days they'd worked together. Not the fear from the terminal, not the shame from the conference room, but something steadier. "Mr. Carter, can I ask you something? And you don't have to answer." "Ask." "That night, in the terminal, when I ran after you and I begged you to undo it." She swallowed. "You said no. You said you couldn't undo it, that it was already done. And you were so cold about it, and I've thought about it every night since that coldness, because it didn't match the man I've gotten to know these 2 weeks. So I have to ask, was it real? The coldness? Or were you already, even then, were you already planning to give me my job back?" Ethan considered the question seriously, because she'd asked it seriously. "It was real," he said finally. "That night I meant it. I was hurt, and I was angry, and I looked at you, and I saw the woman who grabbed my collar, and I wanted you to feel a fraction of what you'd made me feel, and I'm not proud of that, but it's true." He paused. "The plan came later, around 3 in the morning when I couldn't sleep, and my daughter had asked me if I won, and I realized that the version of winning where you lose everything, where I destroy you and your kids and walk away feeling righteous, that version didn't actually protect anybody. It just made one more broken family. And I've got enough of a system builder's brain that I can't stand a solution that doesn't scale." A small, tired smile. "You know what changed my mind about you, Ms. Prescott? It wasn't mercy. It was math. A destroyed flight attendant helps no one. A reformed one who tells the truth to 200 colleagues a month, that's the highest leverage asset in this entire building. I didn't spare you because I'm a good man. I spared you because you're useful. The goodness was just a bonus." Diane laughed, a real one, surprised out of her, the first real laugh he'd heard from her. "That is the least sentimental reason for mercy I've ever heard in my life." "I'm an engineer," Ethan said. "We're not sentimental. We just build things that work." But it was around then, around the 2-week mark, with the reforms rolling out and the hashtag still climbing, and Diane transformed into the unlikeliest advocate the airline had ever produced, that the twist arrived that none of them saw coming. Because Daniel Reyes called Ethan and asked to meet alone, off the books, no lawyers. And when Ethan arrived, the chief operating officer of the airline looked like a man carrying something he could barely hold. "I have to tell you something," Reyes said. "And when I do, you're going to want to walk away from this whole deal, and I won't blame you. But I've watched you these 2 weeks, and I've watched what you did with Prescott, and I've decided I'd rather you hear it from me than find it out later and know I hid it." Ethan sat down slowly. "Tell me." Reyes was quiet for a long moment. Then, "The recliner in 3C. Gregory Vance's broken seat. The thing that started all of it." He looked up and his face was gray. "It wasn't a random malfunction, Mr. Carter. That seat had been reported broken 4 times in the previous month. 4 separate maintenance reports, all flagged, all deferred, because fixing it meant taking the aircraft out of service for half a day, and somebody in operations decided the revenue mattered more than the repair. He swallowed. We knew that seat was broken. We flew it anyway. Which means the tantrum that got you thrown off that plane, the whole chain of events, all of it traces back to a decision my own company made to put profit over a functioning seat. It wasn't just Prescott's prejudice, Mr. Carter. It was our negligence that lit the fuse. And I've had that report sitting on my desk for 4 days, and I couldn't decide whether to show it to you. And I finally realized that a man who traded $52 billion for the truth deserves the truth from me too. The room was silent. And Ethan Carter sat there, absorbing it, understanding for the first time the full shape of the thing, that it hadn't started with Diane's hand on his collar at all. It had started weeks earlier in an operations office with a spreadsheet and a deferred repair and a decision that a broken seat was cheaper than a fixed one. The prejudice had been the weapon. But the company's own cost-cutting had loaded the gun. He looked at Daniel Reyes for a long moment. "You know what you just did," Ethan said quietly. "You just proved I was right to trust you. Because the old you, the one from 2 weeks ago, would have buried that report so deep nobody ever found it. And instead you drove across the city to hand it to the one man who could use it to burn your whole company down." He leaned back. "So here's what we're going to do with it, Mr. Reyes. We're not going to burn anything down. We're going to add it to the reforms. Every deferred safety repair gets published now. Every one. Same as the complaints. Because you were right, the prejudice was only half of it. The other half was a system that taught everybody all the way up that the cheaper number always wins. And I don't fix half of a design problem." He extended his hand. "Thank you for telling me. It cost you something to do that. I saw it. Don't think I didn't." And Daniel Reyes, chief operating officer of a 90-year-old airline, shook the hand of the man he'd wronged and felt something he hadn't felt in years, which was the specific, clean relief of a man who'd finally chosen the hard right over the easy wrong and found out he could survive it. That night, Ethan drove back to his sister's house, and Lily was waiting up, and she climbed into his lap on the couch and asked him the question she'd been asking every night for 2 weeks. "Daddy, did you win today?" And Ethan pulled her in, and he thought about Diane telling the truth to 200 people, and Gregory Vance's daughter in a doorway, and Daniel Reyes driving across a city to hand over a report that could have destroyed him, and 400 strangers becoming 4,000, becoming a movement with a name. "Yeah, Lilybean," he said. "I think today I did." "What'd you win?" He kissed the top of her head. "I think," he said slowly, "I won a few people back. People who forgot who they wanted to be. And I helped them remember." He smiled. "That's the best kind of winning there is, baby. The kind where nobody has to lose for you to win." She thought about that with the deep seriousness of a 7-year-old. "That's a good win," she declared, exactly as she had 2 weeks before. "Yeah," Ethan said softly, holding his daughter as the last light went out of the sky. "Yeah, it really is." 3 months later, the thing Ethan built got its first real test, and it happened without him in the room. It was a Tuesday night, a red-eye out of Chicago, and a flight attendant named Marcus Webb, 26 years old, 2 years on the job, one of the 200 who'd sat in silence while Diane Prescott told them the truth was working the aisle when a first-class passenger began to complain. Loudly. About a family that had been seated near him. A tired-looking man in a work jacket traveling with 2 small kids, one of them fussing. And the passenger, a man in an expensive suit, with the particular impatience of someone who believed his comfort was a law of nature, leaned into the aisle and said the words that used to be a magic spell. "Can you move them? They don't belong up here. Move them back where they belong." And 3 months earlier, Marcus Webb would have done it. He'd have done it fast and quiet, and called it good service, the way he'd been trained his whole career, the way the whole system was built to make easy. Instead, Marcus Webb thought about a woman standing in front of 200 people saying, "The cruelty doesn't feel like cruelty from the inside. It feels like competence." And he looked at the tired man in the work jacket, who who was already gathering his kids' things, already standing up, already doing the thing exhausted. Men in work jackets have always done, which is to make themselves smaller before anyone makes them. And Marcus Webb said the sentence that Ethan Carter had reorganized his entire life to make possible. "Sir, please sit down. You paid for these seats. You're not going anywhere." Then he turned to the man in the suit. "This family has every right to be in the seats they purchased. If you have a complaint about who's seated near you, I'll note it, but nobody is being moved. Is there anything else I can help you with?" The man in the suit sputtered. He demanded a supervisor. He got one, the purser who backed Marcus completely. He threatened to call corporate. And the beautiful thing, the thing that made Ethan press his hand over his mouth when Raymond told him the story 2 days later, was that under the new system, corporate was exactly who the man should have called, because corporate would have pulled the incident report, seen a crew member doing precisely what the reformed policy required, and closed the complaint in his face. The tired man in the work jacket never knew how close he'd come to the old way. He just knew that for once in his life, someone in a uniform had looked at him and his kids and decided they belonged. He found Marcus before he deplaned and shook his hand and couldn't quite say what he wanted to say, and Marcus told him he didn't have to say anything, and the man walked off that plane with his kids and his dignity both intact, and he had no idea that a chain of events 3 months and $52 billion long had reached forward through time to protect him on an ordinary Tuesday night. That was the first one Ethan heard about. It was not the last, because the reforms didn't stay at one airline. They couldn't once they worked. The second airline came asking within a month, quietly through back channels, an executive who'd watched the whole saga and realized which way the wind was blowing. Then a third. Then the industry association that set standards across all of them, which invited Ethan to present the framework he'd built. And Ethan showed up in a plain button-down and stood in front of a room of aviation executives who 6 months earlier wouldn't have known his name. And he did not give them a lecture about kindness. He gave them the numbers. "You think this costs you money?" he told them. "It doesn't. I'm an engineer, so let me show you the math. Every forced removal generates a complaint, a legal exposure, a viral risk, a customer you lose forever, and the 11 people they tell. The old system wasn't cheap. It was just a cost you'd learned not to see, because it landed on people you'd decided didn't matter, so it never showed up on your desk. All I did was make the cost visible. Make it visible, and suddenly protecting the man in the hoodie isn't charity. It's the cheapest thing you'll do all year." He clicked to the next slide. "You don't have to become good people. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to become people who can count." They adopted it, nearly all of them. Not because Ethan had shamed them into it, but because he'd done the far more durable thing. He'd made the right choice. The profitable one built the decency directly into the incentive, so that even the executives who didn't care about a tired dad in a work jacket would protect him anyway, because the spreadsheet now told them to. Ethan understood something most reformers never learned, which was that you don't win by making good people out of everyone. You win by building a machine where even the indifferent are carried toward the right thing by the current of their own self-interest. His daughter, meanwhile, learned to ride a bike. That happened on a Saturday, in the same 3 months, and Ethan was there for every second of it, running behind her down the sidewalk, with his hand hovering under the seat, letting go, catching, letting go again, until the moment every parent waits. For the moment she pulled away from him, wobbling, and then not wobbling, pedaling down the block entirely under her own power, shrieking with joy, and Ethan Carter stood in the middle of the sidewalk, with his hands empty and his heart in his throat, and did not chase her because the whole point of running behind her all that time had been to make himself unnecessary. That was the thing he realized watching her go. That was the thing about all of it. The best thing you can build for someone is the thing that means they don't need you anymore. He'd run behind the man in the work jacket for 3 months without ever meeting him, hand hovering under the seat. And then Marcus Webb had said, "You're not going anywhere," and Ethan had gotten to let go. But there was one piece of it that hadn't closed. One person from that plane he hadn't heard from since. And it came back around on an evening in the 4th month when Ethan's phone rang with a number he didn't recognize, and he almost didn't answer, and he was glad for the rest of his life that he did. "Mr. Carter." A young voice. A girl's voice, uncertain. "You don't know me. My name is Hannah. Hannah Vance." A breath. "Gregory Vance is my dad." Ethan sat down. "I know who your father is, Hannah. I know you do." A pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was shaking, but she pushed through it. "I got your number from it doesn't matter how. I've been trying to work up the nerve to call you for 2 months, and I had to. Because I need to tell you something and my dad doesn't know I'm calling, and he'd probably be embarrassed, but I don't care." She took a breath. "I need to tell you what you did to my family. I need you to know." Ethan's chest tightened. "Okay, I'm listening." "My dad was—" She stopped, started again. "You met him for one day, on the worst day. So you know exactly one version of him, and it's the worst one, and it's fair that was really him. But I've had him for 15 years, and Mr. Carter, he was getting worse. Every year. Meaner. More impatient. Like the whole world was a waiter who was too slow. And I was starting to become like him, because that's what you do. You become the house you grow up in. And I could feel it happening, and I didn't know it had a name until I saw that video." Her voice cracked hard now. "I saw my dad's face while they hurt you, and I saw my own future in it. I saw exactly who I was going to be, and it terrified me." "Hannah, please let me finish. I practiced this." She drew a shaky breath. "The night I asked him if that was really him on the plane, he couldn't answer me. And I went to bed thinking I'd lost him, that my dad was just that person now forever. But something happened after that. I don't know what you said to him on the phone. He's never told me. He just says, 'The man on the plane said something to me.' But he changed, Mr. Carter. Not all at once. But he changed. He says, 'Thank you' to people now. Actual people, waiters. The guy at the parking garage, like they're real. He came to my swim meet, and he didn't check his phone once. He apologized to me for the years before, which grown men do not do. My dad, especially, did not do." She was crying now, openly. "I got my dad back. The one I forgot I had, or maybe never had. And I know it's insane to thank you because he only became that man after he helped hurt you. But I don't have anybody else to thank. You're the reason. Whatever you said, you gave me back my father, and I needed you to know that the thing you did didn't just change airlines. It changed a house. My house. It changed who I'm going to be." Her voice dropped to almost nothing. "So thank you. That's all. Thank you for not destroying him when you could have. Because if you'd destroyed him, I'd have lost him for good, and instead I got him back better. Thank you." Ethan Carter sat in his sister's kitchen with the phone against his ear, and his eyes shut, and his throat locked tight, and it took him a long moment before he could speak at all. "Hannah," he finally managed, "I want you to hear something, and I want you to really hear it, because you're 15, and you just did the bravest thing an adult would struggle to do." He steadied himself. "You didn't get your father back because of me. I said maybe 4 sentences to him on a phone at 11 at night. That's nothing. That's a spark. What turned it into a fire was you standing in that doorway asking him a question he couldn't answer. You're the one who changed him, Hannah. A daughter standing in a doorway did what the entire internet couldn't do. I just happened to be the thing you both looked at. But you're the one who saved your dad. Not me. You. And you need to carry that, because someday you're going to stand in another doorway in front of somebody else who's losing their way, and you're going to remember that you already did it once. You already changed a person. At 15. Most people go their whole lives and never do it once. There was silence on the line, and then a sound that was half a sob and half a laugh. "I didn't think of it that way," she whispered. "Start thinking of it that way," Ethan said gently. "And Hannah, tell your dad I said hello. Tell him the man on the plane is proud of him. He'll know what it means." He hung up, and he sat there for a long time. And his sister, who'd been standing in the kitchen doorway the whole time, came and sat down across from him, and didn't say anything, because there wasn't anything to say that the phone call hadn't already said. The airline recovered, fully. Its stock passed its old high within the year, and the strangest part, the part the business analysts kept circling back to and couldn't quite explain, was that it recovered specifically because of the disaster. Because when the reforms rolled out, and the story of what Ethan had done became the story of a company that got caught doing wrong and chose to become right, instead of chose to become invisible. People flew that airline on purpose. They sought it out. It turned out that a company willing to publish its own failures and fix them was a company people trusted more, not less. And Daniel Reyes, who kept every promise he made in that neutral conference room, and a few he hadn't made, became improbably a case study taught in business schools. The executive who traded $52 billion of leverage and came out ahead by refusing to hide. He and Ethan stayed in touch. Not close exactly, but every few months Reyes would call and they'd talk, and near the end of one of those calls in the second year, Reyes said something Ethan kept. "You know what you never understood about that day, Ethan? Or maybe you understood it and I didn't until much later." A pause. "You think you won because you had the phone call. The $52 billion, the leverage. That's what everybody thinks. That's the whole story as far as the world's concerned, the powerful man they didn't recognize. But that's not why you won." Reyes was quiet a moment. "You won because when you had all that power, you didn't use it the way power gets used. Everybody in my company was braced for you to be us, to take the leverage and squeeze. And you did the one thing none of us saw coming. You used it to make us better instead of make us bleed. That's the thing nobody can copy, Ethan. Anybody can have leverage. Almost nobody, when they finally get it, refuses to become the thing that hurt them. That's the whole story. Not the phone call, the choice you made after it." And Ethan, who had thought about that day more than he'd ever admit, knew that Reyes had finally said the true thing. The thing under all the other things. Diane Prescott flew for 6 more years, and then she stopped flying because the airline created a position that hadn't existed before her, head of a training program that had spread by then across the whole industry, a program built entirely on the premise of a woman standing in front of a room and saying, "I did the cruel thing for 22 years and called it competence, and here is how it happens, and here is how it stops." She trained thousands, tens of thousands eventually. Every one of them carried a piece of a plane. They were never on a man in a hoodie. They never met into every cabin they ever worked. And the number of tired men in work jackets who got to keep their seats because of it could never be counted, because that was the whole nature of the thing. You can count the times the system fails, but you can never count the times. It quietly holds the times nobody gets hurt, the ordinary Tuesday nights that stay ordinary because somebody said you're not going anywhere and meant it. Diane wrote Ethan a letter once in the 5th year, handwritten, and the only line of it he ever showed anyone was the last one, which he showed to his daughter when she was old enough to understand. It said, "You could have ended me, and I would have deserved it, and the world would have called it justice. Instead, you handed me the one thing I never earned and never expected a way to be useful. I have spent every year since trying to become worthy of a mercy I got before I was worthy of it. That's the trick, isn't it? You gave me the mercy first and made me grow into it after. I don't think I'll ever fully get there, but I'll die trying, and that's more than the woman who grabbed your collar ever would have done. Thank you for seeing a person I couldn't see myself yet." Ethan kept the letter in a drawer, and he never became a public man in the way Raymond had warned him he would, or rather, he did for a while, and then the world moved on to other stories, the way it always does, and Ethan let it gratefully sliding back toward the quiet life he'd always preferred. He kept building systems. He kept his daughter fed and loved and unafraid. And the movement he'd accidentally started, the one with the name, outgrew him entirely, which was exactly what he wanted, because a thing that needs its founder is a thing that dies with him, And Ethan had spent his whole career building things that could stand on their own. But the story isn't quite finished because there's one more scene, and it belongs to Lily. She was 14 when it happened. Old enough now to know the whole story, to have grown up in its shadow, to be quietly, privately proud of a father who never once bragged about the thing the internet had briefly made him famous for. And she was on a plane herself, flying with a school group, when she watched a flight attendant start to move a boy, a kid from her class, a scholarship kid, the one whose clothes came from the wrong store, the one the other kids whispered about because a woman in first class had complained that he'd wandered too far forward, looking for the bathroom, and made her uncomfortable. And Lily Carter, 14 years old, stood up in her seat. She didn't have $52 billion. She didn't have a phone call that could stop the world. She had exactly what her father had had that day, and nothing more, the plain refusal to let it happen quietly. "He's with us," she said loud enough to Carrie. "He's part of our school group, and he was looking for the bathroom, and he's not doing anything wrong. Please don't move him." The flight attendant hesitated. And here is the thing Lily didn't know. The thing that closed the circle so cleanly that Ethan wept when she told him about it that night. The flight attendant hesitated because of the training. Because somewhere in her certification years ago, she had watched a video of a woman named Diane Prescott say, "Every one of you has a man in a hoodie in your future." And she had watched footage of a man in a gray hoodie being dragged up an aisle, and she had promised herself she'd never be the one holding the arm. She didn't know the girl who'd stood up was that man's daughter. She never found out. She just did the right thing the way the whole machine had been built to make easy, and she left the boy where he was, and she told the woman in first class that no one would be moved. Lily sat back down. Her heart was pounding. The scholarship kid looked at her from across the aisle with an expression she'd remember her whole life. Not gratitude exactly, but something bigger. The look of a person discovering for the first time that the world might contain people who'd stand up for them. That night she called her father and told him the whole thing, breathless, still shaking with the adrenaline of it. And at the end she asked him a question. The same question. The one she'd been asking since she was 7 years old on his lap on a couch. "Daddy, did I win?" And Ethan Carter on the other end of the line could not speak for a moment, because his whole life had just handed itself back to him through his daughter's voice. Everything he'd built and everything he'd bled for folded into one 14-year-old, standing up in a seat, because standing up was right. "Baby," he finally said, and his voice was thick. "You didn't just win. You're the reason all of it was worth it. Everything I did, the phone call, the whole thing, all of it. I did it hoping that one day the next person wouldn't need a billionaire to save them. That they'd just need a good person nearby who wouldn't stay quiet. And tonight, you were that person. You didn't have the money. You didn't have the leverage. You had a voice and the guts to use it, and that's the only thing that ever actually mattered. That's the only thing that ever saved anybody." He closed his eyes. "You want to know the real victory, Lily? It was never me proving who I was. It was making sure that someday somebody like you would never have to prove they deserved respect before they got it. And tonight, you handed that same gift to a kid who needed it. You finished the thing I started, at 14. There was a silence on the line, and then his daughter, in a small voice, said, "So, that's a good win." And Ethan Carter smiled alone in his kitchen, with a letter in a drawer and a movement in the world, and 14 years of a life that had turned out to mean exactly what he'd hoped it would. "Lily Bean," he said, "that's the only win there ever was. Because in the end, the man they threw off that plane was never really the important one. The important one was every person who ever watched it and decided to stand up the next time it happened to somebody else. Dignity was never something you earned with a title or a bank account or a phone call that could stop the world. It belonged to every single person the moment they were born, equally, completely, and without condition. And the only real measure of a life was whether you spent yours making sure the next person never had to fight to be given what was already always theirs. Ethan Carter spent his that way. His daughter would spend hers that way. And somewhere out there, a scholarship kid who'd been shown he mattered would grow up and stand for someone else, And the thing that started with one tired father refusing to give up his seat would go on and on, long after anyone remembered his name, which is exactly how he wanted it, and exactly how it should be.